Okay, so now we're up to our next keynote, which is from US, China, whatever, both maybe. Bill Russo from Automobility. Please welcome him.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yeah, great. Good morning, and thank you, Jesper, IDA, for the opportunity to speak here. I met Jesper last year at the Danish Industries Conference in May, and actually I've had a couple of opportunities to speak to the Danish Industries Group when they come to China. I've had workshops with them last year. Again, we'll do one this year. Everybody's interested in what's happening there in the electrification area. I was coming here this morning and I could see a Chinese car waiting at the light, an XPeng EV. You're going to see more and more vehicles coming from China to the EU. They are tackling one of the world's biggest challenges, which is electrification. And they're doing it. And I've just so you know a little bit about my own background. I am an American. I'm not going to apologize for that in the current geopolitical environment. Can't change it. It's a fact. I've been in China for 21 years. I've lived half of my adult life in China now. I did spend 17 years in Detroit working in the auto sector there. Started my career, actually, I'll put up a slide, long career, now spanning more than 40 years, but now more than half of it in China. And it is a transformative place in terms of your understanding of the world and understanding of how to kind of really accelerate change. And I came there in 2004 expecting it to be a 3-year assignment, which got extended a year with the company that brought me there, which was Chrysler. Then it was called Daimler Chrysler. And 17 years after my contract ended, I'm still there because it changed the way I viewed the world and what my role in it would be. Going back to Detroit, after having seen what was already the beginning of what was a very exciting development in the automotive industry, there was no going back. Detroit was moving at a glacial pace. And what I saw happening in China, I saw a market that in the turn of this century was about a 1 million unit in annual sales market, become within the decade, within that 2001 to 2010 timeframe, the world's largest car market, and then continue to expand to almost 30 million units in annual sales by 2017. All of the growth of this century, all of it, 100% of it comes from China. And it's become the world's biggest accelerator for technology and innovation. Why? Not because all the technology emanates from China, but it embraces it and commercializes it in ways that we just don't see in the traditional world. And we need that. We need the inspiration from that. We need the scale, the benefits that come from that. And that's the message I try to bring to my clients. I started this company 8 years ago now, 2017. I started Automobility because I felt there was a need for the world to continue to learn from, engage with, and do business with China. And I help clients do that. I help with that. I actually co-authored a book called Selling to China. This one, it was published 2 years ago. It talks about stories of people in different industries and how they've coped with the acceleration of change. We actually subtitled the book, Stories of Success, Failure, and Constant Change, because the one thing you can expect in working in China is things will be different in the future from what they've been up until now. But one thing is very consistent is there is a policy of guiding where it wants the future to be. And they do invest in the building blocks for that future. If you're interested in going deeper on any of that, come see me. I did bring on a few copies that we could share with you later. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about the topic of the day, which is the electricity and road transport. We actually wrote a paper on this. And one of the surprising developments that I think isn't understood within China isn't just about making products that the world can make or maybe create for the first time elsewhere. It's also about bringing a set of capabilities together that we probably don't have the equivalent of in the rest of the world. And one of the things I like to point out is China is not only the world's biggest car market, it's the world's biggest internet economy. And the internet giants in China are actively engaged in deploying capital toward making the car a smart device on wheels. That XPeng we saw outside, one of its principal investors is a company called Alibaba. It's one of China's big internet giants. They're best known as an e-commerce company. But they also run and own the world's largest ride-hailing fleet, a company called Didi Chuxing. It's an Uber-like company. They're also the world's biggest mobile payment platform with Alipay. So when you look at cars coming from companies that have invested from the internet, they have a different configuration. There's no question that these are computers. There's no question that they have data aggregation capability. There's no question of whether or not they're going to be monetized after they're sold, because that's what internet companies do. They sell you devices that host app-based services that get you into a transactional recurring revenue relationship with the smart device. And if the car happens to be smart and it happens to have a battery in it, then you can plug it into a network and have it become part of the infrastructure. It becomes a storage device, it becomes an energy trading platform. All of what Klaus was talking about, we're seeing that get deployed. We're seeing it come from multiple companies, many of them backed by the internet. This is an article that is really the precursor for the topic that I'm sharing with you today. That article was actually read by a fellow who wrote an op-ed that appeared in the Japan Times. I take it as a compliment when somebody reads your stuff and writes an op-ed about it. And he titled it, "China's EVs May Change the World in Unimaginable Ways." I couldn't have said it better myself. Unimaginable ways. What does he mean? What did I mean, and what did he pick up? And this is a direct quote from the article. I didn't take that analysis because he was talking about electrification, thinking about it purely from the standpoint of the challenge of electrification, of making cars powered by electricity, which is the way most of the world is looking at the problem. The problem, viewed the way it was solved in China, was viewed differently as how do I monetize this thing, not just when I sell it, but how do I make it part of the infrastructure? Because the game wasn't just to repower transportation, it was to reimagine the whole ecosystem around energy generation, clean energy deployment. And I'll explain the reason behind the motivation. Whenever you look at something that's happening, you got to ask, why are they doing this? What's the purpose of this? What is the end game that they're trying to accomplish? And there are a few things that I'll highlight in the talk today that'll point to the answers to those questions. But mobility is the most visible element, the most frequent touch point in city services ecosystems. If things are to be brought to you, or if services are to be accessed by you, mobility is the dispenser, right? It's how we get things done. It's the circulatory system of the economy. And as I talk about in the book chapter, mobility innovation has been the hallmark of the advancement of civilizations. The great civilizations in the world have been defined by their ability to innovate around mobility. The ability to transport goods over the seas, the ability to move things over land, on rail, the ability to move people on the ground, the ability to move through air travel. The leading economies of the world, whether it was the age of discovery in Great Britain, or the Vikings, or the Dutch, it was their ability to move that made them great nations. And China in the 21st century recognized innovating around mobility was going to be the way they ensure sustainability of their economic development. That's the critical thing. It wasn't just about make the economy grow and employ lots of people and generate jobs. It does all that. But it also is about how do I create an economic powerhouse that the world has not seen before. That's what's happening. And that's, again, what caught me and caused me to stay there for half of my adult life. Anyway, read the articles. The link here, if you get the PDF, will tell you more about what we said in the article. But let me give you the short version in today's presentation. And I broke it into a few chapters. The Race to a Sustainable Future, which is the the title of the chapter that I wrote of this book. And then I'm going to talk about the auto industry and how it's been going through this transition and what China's role is in it. And a new concept that I did talk about in the article on the previous page was the Internet of Energy ecosystem, the idea of how the internet economy exerts a gravitational influence on the direction of an industry like the automobile industry, and how that then transforms the overall ecosystem that it's a part of, which is the energy economy. And then I'll summarize with some key takeaways and point you to some other additional resources that you might be able to dig into. Okay. Let me make sure I have some moisture in my mouth. Okay. Energy security on crude oil has marked the conduct of international relations, whether we know it or not. It's the ability to secure the resources needed to continue to power our economic development. And if I look at the nations in green versus the nations in red, the ones that are net importers or net exporters of energy are going to point to where the risks are. And as you can see, Europe, China are net importers. That is the biggest economic risk faced by the economic development of China. It is a net energy importer. It is a net energy importer. So we ask, what's the motivation for challenging the energy paradigm? It's breaking the energy dependence that China has on carbon-based energy resources, that it does not have domestic energy security. So if the world geopolitically gets unstable, you need to secure energy resources, or you will be at the stranglehold of whatever nations do control that, which is largely the Middle East, which is largely tied to the Western world. So China's motivation to not only build the economic powerhouse that it has built, but to secure its future was, in part, a motivation to break the energy dependency that had been built up over the course of history since World War II. And as a direct result of that, if you look at the index on the vertical axis, fossil fuel import dependence, the ones on the top are the most exposed to the fossil fuel supply chains, and the ones on the horizontal axis are the ones who are investing most heavily in renewable energy patents. And you can see China being above the line and farthest to the right. So the most significant investments in renewable energy technologies have been made by China. Now, of course, China has far more people graduating with advanced technology degrees that are focusing and researching on these topics. So that gives them a people advantage. Commercialization, though, still remains the challenge, is how do you take the ideas and then turn them into actual action. But if I focus within the renewable energy topic at where's the highest leverage point for the attacking the implication of the high dependency on carbon-based resources, the highest leverage point, if I look at the developments or the predictions here, on the sustainable development scenario of achieving a net zero result, the SDS prediction shows a 4x increase in the use of renewables, and the 2050 scenario shows a 6x increase to achieve carbon zero by 2050. But look at the highest leverage points within that mix of leverage is EVs and battery storage. So with that then comes the challenge of what are the material requirements, what is the energy resource requirements for achieving those objectives. And you can see the increase here, the magnitude of increase in the need for lithium, a 42 times increase from 2020 level in order to achieve these targets, a 25 times increase in graphite, a 21 times increase in cobalt, 19 times increase in nickel, and 7 times increase in rare earth. So if you're going to achieve energy security, you need to secure the supply chains for this stuff. That's your challenge. So this is part of the blueprint. So the idea that why is China focusing on electrification? Because it's the highest leverage point in achieving a renewable energy-based, a energy-secured future, and they have the ability to secure these resources, not because they mine all of that within their borders, because they dominate the supply chain for the processing and the scaling, and that has economic weight in the calculus of whatever organizations are pulling that stuff out of the ground. That's not carbon-based energy resources. So doubling down on Middle East oil or Russian oil, which is what unfortunately, what the US administration is currently doing, is its defensive routine to defend against the rising China. China's all in on investing in these technologies for sustainable economic development. The motivation is sustainable economic development. The goal is energy security as a tool to achieve sustainable economic development. And they're putting their money where their policy objectives have been stated. So if I look at renewable power investments that have been made over the course of the last decade, you could see China as the lead. And if I look at the global share of total energy renewable capacity, this is installed capacity in gigawatt hours, China with 1/3 of the world's total. If I go beyond that and I look at the planned renewable energy capacities in solar and wind, you can see China's objectives, and they've already achieved their 2030 objective. They targeted 1,200 gigawatts of wind and solar by the end of the decade. They've already achieved that, and they have the comparative capacities that are planned for individual countries on the right. You can see China is almost 9 times bigger than the nearest competitor in terms of the under construction amount. So they're already adding to the lead that they have. Okay, so that's kind of the energy security part of this, which I think is a critical piece of understanding the motivations and the why behind what's happening. Because a lot of people think it was sort of a calculated central government plan to squeeze out foreign competition, which is a popular conspiracy theory in the way the West views China. That China had this diabolical plan and somebody sat behind the Wizard of Oz curtain plotting this calculus of how do I snare the foreign companies to build up the know-how needed so that I can steal an industry away from them and I can force the Chinese people to buy these Chinese cars. And again, it's all bullshit. None of that's true. None of that's true. Foreign companies did not prioritize the pivot because their governments did not incentivize them to invest in technologies to replace the very profitable businesses they had built for over a century. And if you're going to get companies who are profit-making businesses, I'm not faulting the companies, I've worked for that industry. If you're going to incentivize for-profit businesses who have a fiduciary responsibility to return profits to their shareholders and make good use of their capital, then they have to find ways to profit. And if they can't do that in a short term, or if they cannibalize that which they profit from today, then they're not doing their job. So you can't fault the corporations for not pivoting. The government then needs to step in. If this is the objective that you're trying to secure the future of your industry and your economy, then you need to make it worth the while of those industries to make those investments by creating subsidies. Yes, it's not a dirty word. By creating incentives for consumers to make decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make given everything equal economics. So this is what China does extremely well, is put the government and the business in partnership, public and private partnerships to achieve policy objectives. And they don't do it perfectly. They certainly don't do it perfectly. But let me give a little bit of historical context. If I look at energy consumption over time, and I look at the rise of the petroleum and oil and gas economy over the 20th century, even dating back through the 19th and late 18th century, you could see how mobility has evolved from the horse-drawn carriage era to the horsepower automobile, Carl Benz initial automobile from 1885, which is on display in Stuttgart, to Henry Ford's Model T, which mass commercialized the car. Henry Ford didn't invent the car, he didn't invent the combustion engine, but he made them affordable. He democratized mobility by mass producing the car. Made it such that anyone could afford one, even a factory worker. That changed the world. And the US led the world in the commercialization of the automobile in the 20th century. In fact, by 1950, the US produced more than 75% of the world's automobiles. By 1950. Today it produces about 10%, and a lot of that has content coming from elsewhere. Golden era, that was the mid-20th century where the US dominated. But this late 20th century, the modern internet era came into being. The world began to shift and change. Tesla launched the Roadster initially, then the Model S, and then the Models 3 and Y, which brought in sort of an affordable configuration. And the question we're now faced with is, going forward in the future, will the 20th century, what will the innovations be that will challenge the paradigm for mobility? Will power these vehicles? What internet era features and materials will they use, and how will they be deployed? How will they be deployed into both individual car ownership and mobility services based use cases? And if I look at how the capital markets have responded to the forward development, you could see evidence that they don't believe the automotive industry anymore is the place to invest. When you've got, it's a little bit way over subscribed, but the idea of Tesla being 3 times, this was before Elon, well, this was during Elon Musk's meltdown. Even after his meltdown, at March 17th, they're still 3 times more valuable than the company that produces the most cars in the world, which is Toyota. It's crazy, the valuation shift. And look at Uber, which doesn't even make a car, but puts the most people in cars through ride-hailing, valued at 3 times, almost 3 times Volkswagen. The world sees the future of mobility in a different way, viewed from the perspective of what is the opportunity for investment. If I look at the world's auto industry over that period, from the golden era to the present day, you could see how it evolved from dominated by the US and the big 3 to the rise of East Asia in the late 20th century. You could see how the production footprint shifted from a US-dominated world to an increasingly East Asia penetrated. You see, by 1990, made in Japan, Japan actually had more, almost 28% of the world's automobile production was concentrated in Japan. And then a lot of these companies actually started to distribute their factories to other markets around the world. But around 2000 was a point in time where China, prior to the WTO accession, was making about 1 million units a year. Wasn't a very significant automobile market to the auto industry, but that all changed after the accession of China to the WTO. The floodgates of foreign investment opened up, and we saw the rise from 1 million to nearly 30 million units by 2017, which was the peak year for automotive sales in China. Now 1/3 of the cars in the world, almost 1/3, are made in China. And you've got a whole new set of players, not just car makers and manufacturers, but mobility solutions providers that are entering the mobility problem solving. From a sales standpoint, this is how the markets have moved. We mentioned earlier the 2017 peak year. It was also the peak year in China for sales. We haven't matched that since 2017. And the world's auto industry peaked at 96 million units in 2017. We had some pullback during the COVID period, and it hasn't fully recovered. We have not fully recovered. And China has not come back fully back to where it was in 2017. But in that same time frame, the market changed dramatically. China's market is now penetrated with about 47% passenger vehicle, about 45% overall new energy vehicle penetration into the population. This is the total sales. You can see the peak year was 2017 in China at 29.1 million units. Last year we hit 26.3, so we're not back to the previous peak. This does not include cars that were made in China and exported, which last year totaled 5.8 million units. So if you add that to this, you get about 31, a little bit more than 31 million units of automobile production in China. By the way, none of that was expected, that growth trajectory that led to that peak in 2017. The industry assumed the market would continue to grow, and they had every reason to believe it would. There was no reason to believe in 2017 that suddenly the market's going to stop growing and people are going to start buying EVs. So if you are a Ford or a General Motors or a Daimler or a BMW, you are planning for continued expansion of your business in China. And there was no evidence at that time that the consumers are going to shift to EV. It was 800,000 units, mostly sold to fleets and mostly state-owned companies grabbing subsidies. There was no retail consumer out there saying, I got to have my Porsche, but I want it as an EV. There was no evidence yet at that time, but I'll tell you, there was already about a 17-year period. Now, you go back and look at my writings. I've been writing about this for 15 or more years. There was already evidence that China was putting money into investing in infrastructure for charging EVs long before there was ever retail consumers out there buying them. There was already programs in place to continue to subsidize the purchases. The energy security mandate dates back to the turn of the century when the market was just 1 million units in size. So there was already the policy in place, and it's been in place for more than 2 decades, to prioritize electrification of transportation and to invest in the infrastructure long before there were retail consumers interested in buying these vehicles. But look at the growth since 2017. It's a net negative 1.4% CAGR since 2017. And if you bet on the wrong horse, if you bet on ICE and you bet it to continue to grow, it's down 8.9% CAGR. And if you miss the NEV party, you'll miss out on a 46.4% CAGR growth since 2017. By the way, that's all substitutional, because that's not growth in the market, that's replacing the ICE. That's the substitution of the ICE for the NEV. And the EV sales, I told you 1/3 of the world's automobiles are made in China, 2/3 of the world's EVs are made in China. And as you heard from Klaus, 69% of the EV battery capacity is installed in China. And look what they dominate, the supply chain. Did all the cobalt come from China? No. Did all the lithium come from China? No. Did all the manganese come from China? No. Did all the nickel come from China? No. But look where it got processed, because they are the superscaler of the EV battery. And if you're the guys pulling that stuff out of the ground and you want a market to sell that into, sell it to the material processors who are going to build those solutions into these batteries. That's where you make your money. Securing the supply chain was the motivation. They achieved it. And now Made in China is going global. Here's the twist on the fact that China unfortunately slowed down, is it caused the Chinese companies to prioritize selling outside of China. Up until then, they had everything they could handle in selling into their own country. But when the Chinese market, when the flattening of the curve happened in the growth of the domestic demand and all the capacity had been installed, then you just take that capacity and you reallocate for overseas sales. And since 2019, we've had an almost sextupling of automotive exports. 1 out of every 5 cars made in China today are leaving the country. And 70% of them are powered by what? Gasoline. Did I surprise you with that? Gasoline. Why? Because people in China don't want those anymore. And if you put up a tariff on EVs, which the EU did, guess what they could sell you? You didn't put up a tariff, by the way. EU did not put up a tariff on ICEs or plug-in hybrids. So if you say, I'm going to tariff the BEVs because I'm afraid of those, they'll sell you the ICEs. They got plenty of them. They don't want them anymore. So this is the consequence. The unintended consequence of tariffs is they'll find a way around them, either by selling you stuff that's not subjected to the tariff or building them outside of China. Hey, you don't want them made in China? I'll make them in Hungary. I'll make them in Turkey. I'll make them in wherever the hell I need to make them. But what's going to happen is the better companies will emerge, because only the companies that can afford to spend $1 billion on building an overseas footprint are the ones that will do that. And those companies have names like BYD in Cherry and Geely, and they're already doing it. There's already over 70 factories already built, and there's many more under construction for China as it expands beyond its borders. Here's the part you didn't bargain for, though. Here's the part that the world did not see coming. We see it. I see it in China. There is the emergence of the internet giants and their presence on the automotive industry landscape. And I like to describe that as this, what I call two lanes to the future. There's the traditional lane of companies that business model is primarily to manufacture and sell a piece of hardware, and how that hardware moves on the road and what made the propulsion system work. That's changing for all of them, from ICE to NEV. But the business model of the companies on the left is still fairly traditional. They make and sell and manufacture a product, and they have to profit from the unit sales of those products. And I include EV disruptors in that category. Companies like Leap Motor, which has partnered with Stellantis now in selling their cars through their network internationally. BYD, who everybody knows, doesn't need any introduction. You know them now. Nobody really talked about them until this whole thing started. And then companies like Hosan. These are pure EV or NEV companies. Then you got companies like Geely and Great Wall Motors. You may know them more and be more familiar. They've been around. Geely's certainly known because of their Volvo acquisition in 2009. Great Wall, Sykes, Cherry, Bike, Guangzhou Auto. These are state-owned companies. Some of them are owned by local governments, some are owned by the central government. Chang'an, which has also made a big splash recently, saying that they're coming to Europe. They're all going global. But these companies are more or less traditional in the way they think about the car as a intelligent, connected vehicle. They may have intelligent connectivity, but they're not digitally native companies. They're manufacturing companies. The companies on the right are backed by internet giants. They're what I call smart EV companies. They're making the dumb car into a smart car, right? And I have to use the analogy of the smartphone, because if you think about the equivalent of that, when the smart device becomes available and people are addicted to their smart devices, if your ecosystem matters, if the digital experience matters, you're going to be locked in to a relationship with that company already. So companies like Huawei, which makes handsets and smart devices, making cars, yes, they do. They partner with companies like Series and Cherry to make different branded vehicles under their ecosystem, which is the Harmony ecosystem. Xiaomi, which is another smart device maker that makes vehicles today. And all of the ones you see on the right, Li Auto, XPeng, NIO, are heavily backed by the internet giants in China. And what's different about that? And why is it important? By the way, I throw Tesla in there just for conversation. What's Tesla? They're a tech company. The ones on the right are tech, but they're digital tech. Tesla is Silicon Valley tech. They're not a native software-based ecosystem. Tesla's relationship with you may be with the energy ecosystem, but it's not a digital relationship. They don't have an OS. I think Elon Musk's motive to get into Twitter, I thought it was to try to build that. Turned out it was more to give him another mouthpiece. But the reality is Tesla's not really a digital native. They're a tech company. They're more of an EV disruptor. Okay, why is this important in China? Because the internet in China fundamentally transformed lives by making things in life much more convenient because of accessibility of basic everyday services, including mobility. The entry of the internet giants into the ecosystem of solving mobility problems began with Didi and Kuaidi, which were two apps created by Alibaba and Tencent to move people around using a platform, an app, that eventually merged to create the company that's today called Didi Chuxing. But when I look at WeChat and Alipay, the mobile payment platforms, all made their business, and you can see the penetration of over 1 billion people now on these platforms. The internet population in China of over 1.1 billion people, most of the internet population in China got the internet for the first time through a smartphone. The ownership of a home computer was not the normal way people became familiar with the internet in China. It happened through the smart device. And the internet giants are about the mobile internet. It's about serving people with transactional services in their everyday consumption of goods and services. So ride-hailing is one, and most people in China, again, there's a place that 1 million cars within a generation or two prior till today. Car ownership is the vast minority of people. The car park is about 350 million. A lot of that's fleet. There's 1.4 billion people. Far more people ride than drive, so they're served by mobility. And every single one of those people know how to buy things through Taobao or order food through Meituan or book rides with Didi. Consumption of mobility brings the internet economy into an everyday transactional relationship with people who consume goods through the apps. And when they look at the car, they're thinking, how do I lower the TCO? How do I improve the productivity? And electrification becomes a natural way to solve the problem of how to make their ecosystems more profitable. And on top of that, and they've been doing that for 10 years. So this advent of mobility as a service as a way of putting people into a transport solution has evolved from the first wave of mobility disruption to the second wave, which is the electrification of the mobility ecosystem. And now we're about to enter the third wave, which is the AI-based self-actuating, self-driving vehicle. Again, a topic for another day, but far more advanced in deployment in China. So these are the three waves of disruption. We're actually, I like to say the world is stuck in wave one, it hasn't really passed an inflection point. Uber exists, but it's not used by most people. It didn't change the ownership habits of the way we consume mobility. Our ownership preferences didn't fundamentally shift in the West. We live lives like our parents and grandparents did. That's not true even within an individual's life in China. Their life is different from what it was 5 years ago and 10 years ago. A lot of it because of the use of technology. And the expectation that it's always going to be different is in everybody's mind. It's not like us, where I don't want my life to be that different. I want to go to the mall. I want to go to the shop. I don't want to order my food online. In China, it's an everyday thing. Everybody does it every day. So we're stuck in one while China is moving from 2 to 3. Just to give you that point of view. And when you are designing a car, your transactional relationship as an automobile company is sell the car and service the car and design the car with driver-centric features. In China, it's about how do I serve people with mobility and provide services, all of which you see on the outer ring of this ecosystem, to monetize mobility through the aggregation of data and intelligence about the mobility patterns of every single person who consumes mobility with this, independent of whether they ever buy a car. If they book a ride, if they order a food package, you're telling something to the internet economy about your location, the things you prefer, the online behavior that you have even when you're not in the car. And when you step into the car, you want the car to be personalized to the consumption pattern of that person. It knows you, knows who you are. There's even a feature in the Neo car called Know Me. It's a chatbot that can talk to you in whatever language you choose, and it can talk to you as if it has a personalized understanding of you. If you can aggregate, analyze, and monetize an ecosystem of services around the mobility pattern, that's what the internet companies in China are showing the way forward to do. Now, how does that affect electrification of road transport? Well, think about it this way. I started my career at IBM, and we saw the evolution in the computer industry from centralized to distributed computing to the mobile internet. Right? We went from mainframes to standalone personal computers and mainframes, local area network devices, to now today cloud-based infrastructure, mobile devices everywhere connected to the internet, Internet of Things. What happens when the car becomes part of an internet of mobility ecosystem that's monetized in the way I showed you on the previous chart? What if it's an energy storage device? And what if the value of that car, when it's not moving, when it's moving, it needs to be powered by energy. When it's not moving, it's a static energy storage system. How do I deploy not a distributed computing, but a distributed energy resource ecosystem that's activated with the technologies that Klaus was talking about? The vehicle-to-grid based integration. And that's, I use the analogy, again, I come out of a computer industry background. Computer, which is what a smart EV is, and who builds that? Internet companies that know how to aggregate data. A computer, a local area network, and a wide area network. So think about that in the energy management paradigm. This is why the Japan Times article picked it up. The Chinese EVs will change the world in unimaginable ways. This is what he's talking about. The unimaginable ways. It's just not a, holy shit, it's not just an EV. It's a part of a distributed energy resource. It's part of an ecosystem of energy management. It's far beyond just the electrification. The way the media picked this up, by the way, media don't talk about these stories because they don't have the time. There's a media guy here. They don't have the time to spend the time studying it. It's too easy to feed to the audiences that understand the industry through the traditional way. Let me tell you what's different about the car. Well, that's not the biggest paradigm shift. It's how they monetize the car through the ecosystem of services. And one of the ways you monetize the car is its utility. And it has multiple ways to be monetized. Data analytics and data aggregation, who knows how to do that? Internet companies know how to do that. They know how to do that with this. They put 4 wheels on it, move it around. Can it be monetized with the data you're gathering from that? Hell yeah, it can. Do car companies know how to do that? Hell no, they don't. So they're not going to build it. Why? Because it costs money to put that stuff in the car. And that means it's going to be higher priced. That means they'll sell fewer of them. That's the way the product planning paradigm works in the automotive industry. They don't do this stuff because it doesn't make economic sense to them. They don't know how to monetize it. But if NIO, which has a division called NIO Power, does a deal with CATL, which they just did this week, CATL knows how to monetize that asset. That's the unimaginable ways. The core is the electric vehicle. The extended core is the infrastructure, the charging network, the infrastructure, the swapping systems, the high-speed charging, whatever that's attached to the grid that distributes the energy. And it isn't just theory. They've been building this far ahead of the market acceptance of the EV. And this is the deployment of the number of charging systems, both public and private, and the ratio of the public to the NEVs to the public and NEV to the private chargers. You can see the private chargers kicked in 2020 when retail consumers started buying electric vehicles. But the public infrastructure for charging had already been installed. They actually called them zombie chargers for a while because they put all this investment out there and nobody was actually buying EVs. So there was the joke among the Chinese that, look at these zombie chargers, why are they taking up all this space? We'd rather park our traditionally fueled vehicles there. They're not empty anymore. Now they're all full. And people have put their own personal charging capacities into their car parks as well. The vehicle to grid, I won't talk about this. Klaus was talking about it earlier, but the idea that you have to create the bidirectional charging capability and put the intelligence in vehicle. That does require investment. That, again, another reason why the automotive industry shies away from this is, why do I invest in this technology until there's a market? So they always wait for the market to be there first. You've got to incentivize companies to invest. That's the only way you're going to get them off the dime. This is NIO and TEL, which is one of the Chinese vehicle-to-grid companies it's like Delidian is the name of the company. They're one of the largest charging infrastructure deployment companies in China. NIO is known for embracing the idea of the better place model, which was the battery swapping based vehicle. You buy the car, you lease the battery. The battery is rechargeable through a battery swapping infrastructure that they alone built. But now with CATL's help and with other Chinese companies contributing, they're actually diversifying the ecosystem with other partners. I did not update this slide with the announcement that CATL investing in NIO Power, but CATL has developed a standardized, what they call Choco swapping system to deploy the vehicle to grid and battery swapping infrastructure. 3 minutes, and I've been in cars that have been serviced by this. It's damn impressive. to see a car that swaps a battery faster than you could put fuel in the tank. And it's not just happening in China. There are examples of Renault and Nissan that are also experimenting with this technology. But beyond just the car and the infrastructure, there's also the concept of the distributed energy resources and the creation of what I was calling the local area networks around the home, around the communities that are the nodes that are then plugged into the wide area network of the grid to enable flexible energy management and load balancing across the wider networks. And there are examples, again, it's early stage, of these being deployed in large population centers. Huangpu District, which is where my office is in Shanghai, at the center of the city. The population of that area is probably the equivalent of a European country. So it's not small-scale pilots. They're gathering a lot of information about how to deploy this at a national level, doing experiments at the local level. Let me close with one page, just summarizing what I've talked about. The motivation was reducing energy dependence on imported energy, leading to the adoption of mobility electrification as a national strategy to enhance energy security. China, by far, is the leading market in the embrace of electric mobility. A lot of it becomes because of the presence of the information and internet technology revolution that has been happening. That is a unique feature of the development in China. It's not just because the government's putting money in and incentivizing things to happen. It's also because the internet economy, which is a commercial economy, those are private companies. Alibaba, Tencent, yes, they serve at the pleasure of, but they're private companies. They're for-profit, publicly traded businesses, and they are investing in this technology. CATL, listed company, is a private company. BYD, private company. There's only the subset of the companies I talked about earlier that are SOEs. So it is, a lot of this is unlike the way it gets characterized. It's not just, it's statecraft, but it's statecraft guided by policy, orchestrating a system toward a mutually beneficial goal for the nation. They have an Internet of Energy idea that the world doesn't have, and I think we need to learn from. The charging infrastructure has been growing exponentially, and the idea of distributed energy storage and vehicle to grid and distributed, it's part of the design. It's not an accident that all these pieces are being assembled into a picture. Those pictures are not theoretical, they're real. Those are real pilot and real examples. Energy transition is a prolonged process requiring top-down grid reforms to transform urban energy management through innovation and collaboration. And really, how does this happen without, if you don't have a conductor, you have a jazz band, right? If you don't have an orchestra leader guiding the individual movements of the various sections, how do you put all of these different pieces together? And the big difference between the mature markets in China is, and they don't always get it right. The orchestra leader may be playing the wrong music sometimes. I lived through COVID and I had to be locked in my apartment for 2 months. Sometimes they do it wrong. Sometimes they overly fragment. They don't aggregate well. They'll say, go do this, and 15 different provinces all do it their own way, and they don't work with each other. That's your opportunity, Western world. Learn from China the things that they're really good at and do it more efficiently back in your region. I think that would be the opportunity to learn from what's happened there. That's all I have. I do have, in the deck that you'll get, I do have a few other resources, and I do want to just promote the fact that I did launch a podcast this week. And my first episode is up online. It's on Spotify. I interview this guy. He's a former chairman and CEO of M-Mobility, former co-founder of NEO, and we talk about this issue of smart EVs and the implications of that on the supply chain. That's all. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Bill. Very, very interesting keynote. I think a lot of takeaways from all of us, and I know that Sten Backman from Børsen was interviewing you yesterday and set aside 40 minutes, and after 30 minutes, only one question was asked. So there's a lot on the agenda.